Hello and welcome back to Down the Slope. If you've tried to join us live there, you might have noticed a few technical hitches, and we're still getting used to recording live. But welcome back. Good to see you. Maybe not so good to see Hibs. It's been a very up and down week. We had a magnificent result midweek as we defeated Luzern 3-1 at home. And then we had a pretty appalling Sunday, by all accounts, as we lost 2-1, and that was probably a bit flattering to the team. Ryan, come to you first. You went through the game. Not ideal, mate, was it?
Nah, I feel like I've had a massive kick in the stones that's left a bit of residual pain, to be honest with you. It was quite a sore one to take, like, especially after Thursday's performance. Very poor.
Greg, but let's look back. We can also chat a bit about the game Thursday. Just how good was that?
Do you know what? Thursday was really good. I think maybe the first 20 minutes were a bit nervy, but I thought after that we were very good. The football we played, the sort of mucking in for each other as well. I actually thought we played like a team of bastards at times, like we probably had to. But yeah, really good. And then to go for that to yesterday, it's proper European hangover.
And Liam, I know you don't like being asked how are you on the podcast, so let's again try and keep it a bit more positive. So in terms of the European match, who was the man that impressed you most that game? You're on mute.
Fuck me, man. We are a bunch of fucking rank amateurs. I would spend more time talking about the live stream, but we are, I think, based on the basis of today's group chat, and I think how this has started tonight, I think we are a band that's on the verge of splitting up because of creative differences. Like, I feel like there's going to be a split that's going to happen. And to be honest, I don't know who's going which way, but I reckon it just could be a 5-way split and we'll just go and do our own thing. I'll go and pursue our solo careers as a result of DTS going doing the shiter. But good to be back. Oh, you asked me something about Europe, who impressed me the most? Don't know. I mean, fuck. I mean, I was going to say something else to be. It was a very good team performance, but he was still somehow managed to be head and shoulders the best player on the pitch.
And you and podcast dilemmas and Hibs aside, how are you getting on?
Good, mate. Good. It'd be amiss of me to say that I didn't probably expect what happened yesterday to come. I said as much to Greg after as we're like walking out Easter Road on Thursday that I would have changed the whole 11 for Motherwell. There's 36 more league games. You've got one game in Switzerland. I know it's probably not the right attitude, sort of writing games off in the league, but I would have personally rather have seen more changes yesterday. So I would have hoped that we would have got something from the game as my timing was impeccable in the group chat with that. But it's not the end of the world as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, but obviously I don't think it was the result so much as the nature of the result yesterday that has put a lot of a sour taste in a lot of fans' mouths. So today we thought instead of putting up our usual listeners' questions tweet, we would instead kind of do our own thing. So essentially we thought if we put that up, we're going to get at least 30 comments of people saying Lee Johnson out or why is Lee Johnson still manager or some form of variation to that. So instead of looking at it from a perspective of Hibs are shit, Lee Johnson out, let's look at Lee Johnson's not done great all the time. How can he consistently be good and get everybody back on side? So we're going to look at the different ways that we think that Lee Johnson has maybe shown in the past, maybe not shown in the past, and the things that he can implement at the club that can actually get us to a level where fans are consistently going to be happy with how the team's playing football, as well as him being at the helm of the club. So thinking about that, Ewan, we'll come to you first. So what is it you're wanting to cover off and which Lee Johnson needs to tick off his consistency list and get us on track?
I think for me, we're all going to touch on varying tactics and stuff. I think I described it to you guys as playing high and wide. I think Hibs have got a very obvious strength in the wide areas when everyone's fully fit and available, being Martin Boyle and Ellie Yuan. I think there's definitely a decision to be made with Ellie Yuan as to where he's more effective. I think we've seen already this season that he's actually quite effective on the right. Perhaps it takes some decision making out his hands, because he's already on that right foot instead of trying to cut in onto it. But he's probably, for me, still most effective on the left, and that gets the best out of Martin Boyle on the right. So I would like to see Hibs and Lee Johnson operating in a formation. Now, personally, I would prefer to always have two strikers on the pitch as well. So the 4-4-2 for me worked well against Luzern, and I would like us to see Yuan and Boyle staying high, staying wide, and maybe even cheating a little bit defensively. If you know, I think you've heard sort of pundits and stuff say that about various players, and there's maybe an argument to say are the fullbacks good enough to sort of deal with the wingers being high and wide. But I think for Hibs to be really effective, I don't think we're set up to be a possession-based team. I think we're set up to hit teams in behind and hit them really quickly. I think to be able to do that, we need to hit Boyle and Yuan, along with at least one striker, preferably two, high up the pitch, even when we don't have the ball, so that we can counter quickly on teams. I felt we'd done that well against Luzern on Thursday, but in the two league games against Motherwell and St Mirren, everything was incredibly slow in transition. We didn't get the ball into the wide areas nearly enough, and then when the wide players did get, they were incredibly ineffective, potentially, especially with Boyle and Yuan starting quite deep as the game went on.
Do we have the midfield players to help us play 4-4-2? Like, have we got enough athleticism in midfield to allow us to play 4-4-2 in the league?
I think it's difficult at a minute, because I think we would all probably not look at 4-4-2 as being a modern day formation. You'd maybe be worried about getting overrun in midfield. However, the team definitely coped with that against Luzern, who had three midfielders in there.
That's Luzern in Europe, though, rather than in the league, where I think a lot of the teams really. I mean, I just take yesterday as an example. We had three midfielders in there, and we were overrun by Motherwell for the vast majority of that game.
I think it can switch the emphasis. I think yesterday we had three midfielders in there. They had three midfielders. The middle of the park was incredibly tight and compact. We tried to bypass the midfield again, like we did against St Mirren when it was 3-on-3 in the middle of that park as well. I think we become. So it's a different point, but when Christian Doidge is in the team, we become overly. I don't necessarily think reliant's the word, but we hit that ball too quickly. I think if we have the right players higher up the pitch, we can still bypass the midfield area if we need to, but in a more effective manner. Be that getting the ball to Boyle and Yuan quickly and trying to get in behind them. I think you're right that Luzern definitely played on the ball more than what we'd seen than what we'll likely see most SPFL teams do at Easter Road. But to the same point, you would expect the majority of teams to sit in a little bit more, which should mean that Boyle and Yuan need to, by default, start higher and wider.
And Ryan, you had a question there?
I was just going to ask, would you be opposed to like a 4-2-3-1 formation? That still gives you the opportunity to have four kind of forward-thinking players in the park, but also gives you the ability to have an extra man in the midfield if and when needed you're getting overrun.
Honestly, I think I've probably been the most guilty for talking about formations over the sort of 2 or 3 years that we've done the podcast and getting hung up on them. But look at our conversations that we were having when we seen the team against Luzern. I think yourself and Liam were like, it's definitely one of the strikers is going to be deeper than the other one. And we didn't see that, but what we did see was both strikers dropping in to defend deep when they had to. I think if you're going to play 4-4-2 in the league, you're going to have to be incredibly fit. To answer your question, yeah, sure, why not? But I think we've seen probably throughout Lee Johnson's tenure, actually, that we're just much more effective when we have two players up front. At the start of last season, we were playing with a two. I think for a period of time, we've seen Boyle through the middle, especially was at the Rangers game at Easter Road. I think him and Yuan sort of started through the middle together. And again, that's lightning pace up top to really challenge teams. I think we generally all agree that athleticism wins you games in this league, but I think pace does as well, and that's why Martin Boyle has been such a threat over the last sort of 2 or 3 years. So 4-2-3-1 could be a thing, but for me, I would worry with the strikers we've got. I don't think Lafondra is mobile enough to play up front as Sell, nor is Doidge, and I would worry that Venti would get. I think his biggest strengths, but one of his biggest strengths that I've seen so far is his energy in pressing down and closing. I'd worry that he would find himself in areas of the pitch that you wouldn't want your lone striker to be. That if he then did win the ball back or we turned it over quickly, that there'd be nobody there in the central positions.
Good point. Well labelled, Ian. Thanks.
And G, I know you're always one of my go-to guys when it comes to tactics. I know you're a fierce and ferocious defender, but in terms of Hibs attacking, obviously, we looked so much better midweek against Luzern. I know it was a completely different team that started the game, but how do you think, as you and right in the terms of the tactics, that we need to set high and wide every game, or is there something that Lee Johnson can implement consistently that we can actually look to achieve week in, week out?
I like high and wide. I think it gives you the opportunity to push up on their fullbacks and almost nullify their threat down the flanks. In terms of formation, you could do that numerous ways. I don't really need to get caught up on that. But I do like the high and wide because it gives you space to play in that midfield and almost keeps him camped in. I would like to see it implemented every week, to be honest, because every team has fullbacks that push forward, and at home you'll have teams that will sit in. You really need to put the pressure on them, but I don't feel like we put enough pressure on teams. Counter-attacking is not the answer though, at all, full stop, because all that happens is you end up sort of soaking up pressure for a period of time, and then you try and hit them on the counter. That's not good enough, especially at home against teams that sit in. It doesn't work. You need to go and play on the front foot. You need to go and stamp your authority on the game, in my opinion. And if we can do that by getting the fullbacks higher and wider, then absolutely, I think that would work.
I think we make too many basic defensive errors to be a counter-attacking football team in the first place. Yeah. I think if you're going to be a counter-attacking team, you build that on a solid foundation. A team that keeps keeps a clean sheet. Hate to kind of bring up sort of a different example of football, but I think about international football and the North of Ireland's international team at the Euros in 2000 and whatever it was, 2016, was it? They got to the group stages,
Yeah.
But they had 3 or 4 Premier League level centre halves and a bunch of donkeys basically playing in midfield and attack who just ran doggies for them. And they managed to get to the group stages. They managed to qualify for that tournament, playing turgid football, but they had a solid foundation and a base to build upon. I don't think defensively, I just watched the game against Motherwell, you could see some of the basic errors that were made. And not just one individual, there was collective mistakes as well. I don't think defensively we're good enough to be a counter-attacking team, so it's all about playing to your strengths, as we said last week, play to your strengths. And I think our strengths at the moment are as an attacking team because we've got dangerous players to the final third.
I would agree. I think that if you want to be playing counter-attacking football, you need a basis to build from, and unfortunately we are too susceptible to conceding very, very silly goals. We're not strong enough at the back. And listen, again yesterday, one through ball absolutely kills us. It bypasses our full midfield and they're through on goal. Ultimately, Will Fish should be doing a lot better than what he does, but they get a goal from that, and that's one ball played through and wipes us out totally. We're not good enough defensively for that.
And speaking of not being good enough defensively, we'll have a segue here, guys. But Ryan thinks phase 2 of Lee Johnson winning the crowd back over at Easter Road is by making us a defensively sound team. Ryan, talk to us about what the current issues are and how Lee Johnson should go about fixing that.
I think 2 of the guys there have just kind of touched on a couple of points that I'm going to kind of emphasise. In order to be a successful team, you absolutely want to have a foundation to build upon, and the basis of that usually comes from being defensively sound and keeping clean sheets. So in order for us to move forward as a side and be where we want to be, I think we really should be avoiding the use of the 3-5-2 formation. And that is because 2 examples of that was yesterday. You're effectively playing 3 centre-halves where 4 defenders would usually occupy, which in turn creates a lot of space on either side of either centre-half. And to go with that, we're playing Lewis Stevenson out of position in one of those centre-back positions. An example of the space that gets created is the first goal yesterday. Lewis Stevenson gets pulled right out to the touchline. And although he does get physically out-muscled, he shouldn't be out there in the first instance. That's an example of our wing-back not working hard enough. And then obviously the ball gets squared and tucked away. And the second example of the gaps that can be created is, like Greg touched on, one through ball kind of splits the defence in half. Albeit there's an individual error that kind of leads to the goal, it just shows you an example of how much space there can be in that formation. I don't think Lewis Miller is particularly equipped to play at a right wing-back position. I don't think it's a position he's used to. So I think in order for us to move forward, we need to be using a 4 at the back. And build from there. Whatever you play in front of the back 4, that's fine. play what you want, but I think we need to play 2 centre-halves and 2 full-backs that can defend first and foremost, and not have too much distance in between them. Typically, you only want there to be about 15, 20 yards in between each player, so that there's not too much space for midfield runners and through balls to cut you open. Also, I think we need to have a bit better communication and cohesion. Again, we've seen the first goal yesterday that, and this isn't to point fingers at Jago particularly, it just happens to have been him. He was chasing the midfield runner and he tried to pass him on just at the last minute. I think that needs to either be communicated earlier or he just needs to do the easier thing there and follow his man. I'll point to another example there. Dylan Levitt done it against Luzern midweek and he stopped what would have been a certain goal. He just stayed goal side with his man, matched him side by side. And it was a great block. And I think that is the easy thing to do in that situation. You don't try and pass a man on 5 yards before he gets there.
Levitt and you had a really good understanding on Thursday night, I felt like, in the midfield. I felt both of them understood each other's game enough. They were obviously 2 pretty intelligent footballers. I felt like, and again, it's not to dig out Jago, but it's going to sound like I'm doing it, so just take it however you feel like you want to take it at this point. I don't really give a fuck. Jago disrupted the balance of that midfield yesterday, and to be honest, he offered absolutely nothing. He offered nothing in possession, offered nothing without the ball. If you're no good with the ball, if you're going to come into the team, you're going to have to be very, very good without it, and he's neither. So,
yeah, I agree with you.
I'm not trying to segue on my point just now.
People have been praising his work off the ball. Sorry, I've just got another couple of wee things that'll just be quick. Yeah, people have been praising him for his work off the ball, but I think yesterday kind of highlighted in certain instances that he's not all that people say is in that sense. But the other thing that I think we need to do a lot better in order to go forward as a team, in terms of conceding goals anyway, is our wide players need to work a little bit harder to help our fullbacks, because we tend to be overloaded in the fullback areas an awful lot, which in turn leads to a lot of crosses, and we do concede a lot of goals from crosses. And I'm sure that's probably in part due to the volume that we kind of give up in the wide areas. Law of averages is you're going to concede eventually if you keep giving up cross balls. We don't work nearly as hard as we should to prevent that from happening. So, you know, the fullback's got a bit of a thankless task there, trying to kind of go 2-on-1, and any player that's worth his salt will be able to play around one man when he's got a spare man alongside him. And also that correlates to that is I don't have the most confidence in the world with a goalkeeper commanding his area and coming for crosses. It's not something we see a lot of. I know we've paid a fee and brought a goalkeeper in. Unfortunately, injuries led to him not playing, so that may change when he comes back. But I just think if we work harder to stop the cross, it kind of removes that element of panic, knowing that the goalkeeper's not going to come. And there's nothing worse than being a centre-half and trying to head the ball under your own crossbar, especially when somebody's making a midfield run onto it, you know, and just they've got to jump on you. So that's the things that I think we need to be doing better in order to create that defensive foundation and solidify things at the back. What are you smiling at?
If only we just had a full pre-season to work on, man.
Well, that's what you would think, isn't it? I mean,
yep. a couple of things that maybe at the end that I picked up. I think Ryan's right with the wingers, and I know that sort of contradicts what I've said with my point. But I feel like right now our wingers are they're neither here nor there. You know, like they're no staying high enough up the pitch that maybe, like Greg said earlier, pins. At least it makes their fullbacks second guess going forward. But when they come back, they're lazy with it. They're there, but there's no influence in it. If that makes sense, that's sort of what I've taken. I have to be honest, more so Boyle than Yuan probably. I think Yuan, when he has that little bit like the sand between his teeth, he does actually can be effective in our own third. But what I was going to say, Ryan, do you think we've been too quick to default back to last season's partnership at the back? Fish obviously came in. He had been playing with Man U obviously in the pre-season, but he's struggling, isn't he? Let's be honest, in the games that he's playing.
Yeah, let's not beat about the bush. He's made a couple of individual errors, or he's maybe just not been good enough at certain times. I think it was probably an easy decision to default back to because of the partnership that they struck up at the end of last season. But then, as you say, he's had a pre-season with Man United, so he's maybe kind of either got used to their style of play, getting used to playing with somebody else. I think maybe in hindsight, we've got the benefit of hindsight, maybe should have waited a couple of weeks until he'd been in with the squad again, until we threw him back in. But like I say, that's only easy for us to say looking back, but it is a valid point. Maybe it was too quick for him. Maybe he should have been back with the squad for a couple of weeks before he was put back into that position. However, we know his ability, and at foresight, we wouldn't have thought they would make those individual errors. So I suppose there's an argument to be made on both sides. I was happy, we were all happy that he was put straight back in. So, I think Lee Johnson done the right thing at the time. In his defence, for once.
Can I be contradictory on that? I have no issue with throwing Fishin back into the team because I felt like it was a necessity. Harbottle had just kind of come in the door, I think, when the European game started, and I think we're all kind of agreed that Rocky Bashiri's not the sort of long-term answer as a starting centre-back. Or he might be the long-term answer, but he's not the short-term answer, if you know what I mean. I don't think he's ready to come and start games. I think we saw that away in Andorra, so I had no issue with him coming in. I think also, I might be wrong looking at the mistakes, but from my perspective, when I looked at the mistakes he's made, I don't think those mistakes are as a result of lack of understanding. I think they're just as a result of not doing the basics. So if it was an understanding thing, if he lost his man or there was some sort of communication kind of challenge, I don't know, maybe it would be understandable. But I think if he's playing in a back four, do you know what I mean? I know he played in a back three yesterday, but playing a back four, it's a familiar system. It's the system they play at United. He should just be doing better than he has done, to be honest. But he's a 19-year-old, 20-year-old centre half. They're going to be inconsistent.
Forgive me if I just can't remember at all. Did we play a free at all in the second half of last season? And if so, did Will Fish line up on the right-hand side of it? Because for me, I would probably prefer Fish, if we were to play a free, Fish in the middle and Hanlon on the left of it, especially Hanlon. For me, that's comfortably his better position of the free.
So obviously he's the only left-sided natural centre-half, but what problem you're going to have in a three is that you need mobility to play in those outside centre-half positions. You need mobility because you're covering so much more of the pitch than what you usually would in a four. In a four, if you're playing centre-half, you've a player either side of you, whereas if he was playing left side of that three, he would only have somebody on his right-hand side. He's got from there to the touchline to cover. Although Hanlon's been great last season and then the start of this season, I don't think he's got the mobility in order to cover such a big area in such a high-paced physical game. I think his game is more suited to staying centrally, winning his high balls, winning his duels.
Can I just come in? I've got 3 points actually. The first point is around the wingers coming back. The game is all about risk and reward, and we've seen that pay off that night. I'm not wanting everyone back defending. Right? You've got a defence and midfielders to do that. You don't need your wingers coming all the way back as well, because then what happens? They get the ball, and then we're all stuck in our half and we can't get out. So we don't need to pull wingers back at every opportunity. The second point is around playing a three at the back. I would have Fish and Hanlon on the outside and Harbottle in the middle. Harbottle against Groningen was defensively very good. We've seen Will Fish's capabilities with playing the ball out from the back. He's got a couple of assists last season actually from that. And Paul Hanlon can absolutely play football. In terms of, I know you said there, Ryan, 3-5-2 isn't the answer. I don't think it is the be all and end all either, but I think it's definitely an option that we should have. I don't think we should limit ourselves to one specific formation. I think we should be open to changing as and when. I thought it did work well the other night when we went to a three at the back. But again, we were brave on the ball and we took accountability, which is something that seems to be lacking at the moment this season. In the league games, the two I've seen, we've not taken any accountability at all. Jago yesterday didn't run with his man, didn't track his man, and that's where you lose a goal from, because we're too lazy and not wanting to take accountability of tracking the man and staying with him.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Just in terms of the formation, I think it's great to be able to play loads of different systems and loads of different styles of play, going back to front at certain times in the game. I think there's many pros and cons to certain things, but it's just not the formation I would say is our strongest in terms of trying to win games of football from the start. I think our best players are more forward-thinking players. We're shoehorning guys like Obita into left wing back. He's more effective further up the pitch, what we've seen. Absolutely, you can revert to these formations in certain scenarios. I just think from the start of the game would be more beneficial for us to play a more attacking system and get our wingers more involved in the game.
To be honest, if Cadder was fit, I'd feel a lot more comfortable playing 3-5-2.
I was just
that is his position in it, and you can play a left wing back, but I think he's actually fairly effective from as well. So unfortunately, due to injuries, we've not got these options. But I think what we're doing at the moment is we've got players there and we're trying to play them the wrong way.
Yeah.
The 3-5-2 doesn't suit the personnel that he's had
no.
lined up in the.
It didn't suit the personnel we played yesterday. I mean, as good as Miller can be at right back, like we've seen, he just didn't really seem to ever settle into the game at right wing back. To be honest with you, and Louis Stevenson, it's a hard task for him at left centre half. It is a hard task for him. He's played left back all his days, so.
Just on that one, Ryan, he should still be winning his individual battles.
No, he should be
getting out muscled. Because I actually thought he'd done that very well on Thursday. At one point, he sort of got himself across the player and managed to see the ball out. So he's more than capable of doing it. It's just a basic error. It's fundamental stuff from a player who should be doing a lot better than that.
Even from, it is a bad error, even from there, we still have a chance to defend it, and we fail at that as well. So, But that's what I think we need to do, to be a better football team and be more defensively sound. I'm glad you guys brought up a couple of points that we could talk through, and I'll hand it back to you, Harry.
Hey, sweet. Well, I've not really got a natural segue there, Ryan, but thank you for handing back to me. And so far, we've decided that Lee Johnson should try and play high and wide. He should also try and find some way to make himself a bit more defensively sound, because we are a bit flapping at the moment. Dave Graham has chimed in and he says we should play 4-2-3-1. Players aren't good enough to switch during games. And Jason Ladd has said 4-4-1-1. So a bit of attacking midfield in behind the striker action.
4-4-2, it's just 4-4-2.
Right,
it's not 4-4-2.
Mate, they're the same. 4-4-1-1, 4-2-3-1.
We're not going to go into the whole thing, but you start to discover that formations aren't that important. So anyway, moving on. Speaking of formations, the formation we played, however you'd like to construct it at the weekend, had a certain Mr. Jimmy Jeggo. This whole section isn't about bashing Jeggo, but Liam, you feel we need a new number 6.
I thought you were going to try and team me up to be more positive. You've just started with Jimmy Jeggo. No, I mean, I think my personal view in the world is no football club has an absolutely perfect squad, and I think every football club looks at a squad and thinks it can be improved. I've banged the drum for here in a long time that whilst I do recognise the importance of formations, I think personnel's far more important than formations. And I think there's probably a couple of key positions at the moment in the pitch that we're struggling in, but I'm only going to focus on one, just in the interest of time. And I do think that position that we need to strengthen is in the number 6 role. So far this season, we've seen Dylan Levitt play in there for a stint. We've seen Jimmy Jeggo at the weekend there playing there for a stint. We have kind of more laterally, I suppose, seen Joe Newell operate there as well at times. We've tried lots of different people in that position. I always think that it's a telltale sign that when you're rotating one particular position, you're actually not happy with your options in that particular area of the park. So I think we need to sign a 6. I think we need to sign a 6 to, first of all, come in and do some of the stuff that some of those guys can do. So I think Newell and Jeggo and various different components probably make up a really good number 6, but I don't think we've got the sort of all singing, all dancing one that we need. In terms of sort of the player profile that I think we need someone who's probably more aggressive and more mobile than what we currently have. I think we need to perhaps sign someone who's maybe a little bit more combative. So maybe in the sort of style of Marvin Bartley, but ultimately I think we need a better footballer than Marvin Bartley. No disrespect to him, but he was a very good servant to us, but we need someone who's a better footballer. And potentially, again, to use the word mobile, I think athleticism is a really key component of this. Now, you don't see a huge number of 6s in the sort of who's a good example. The sort of Nemanja Matic sort of build anymore. You don't see a huge number of guys with those big long limbs who are there to just kind of block things. You tend to see number sixes who are small to the ground, potentially low centre of gravity, who are athletes and who can also read the game. Ideally, I think we'd bring in someone who can pass the football as well and receive it from the centre halves, take it on the half turn, as Ryan likes to say, or double pivot, as Ryan also likes to say. If maybe he can be part of that double pivot. That's what I think we need. I think we need a guy who can do more, quite simply put, than we've got at the moment, and who is probably a more complete footballer who is a specialist in that position, rather than doing what we're trying to do at the moment, which is take people who are not a specialist and put it into a specialist position on the football pitch. You wouldn't put your right back up front and expect them to score you 20 goals a season.
Just to say before we move on to everybody else in the room, Dave Graham says bring back Kenna. But just before anybody else chimes in here, Liam, just curious to think, and I know you mentioned Marvin Bartley, is there any particular names that spring to mind that have played for Hibs previously that you could point to that you would love, like, to have the archetype of?
Nah, not that I've played for Hibs, because I think that position's moved on so much over the last 20 years. So I think back 20 years, Hibs had Matthias Jack, who was a centre half by trade, who was used in centre midfield, who I don't think mobile is one of the words I would use in the sort of top 3 words to describe Matthias Jack. No offence to the boy, but I don't think he was hugely mobile. But that position has moved on quite a lot. You would look at, the influences of some of the players. If you look at the broader game, players like N'Golo Kante, for instance, I think have really moved that position on quite a lot in terms of what's required. He's obviously not at the level he once was now. I'm struggling to think of a really good example he's played Scotland. One that you'll like, Harry, because you rattled on about signing this boy for ages. Jandro Fuchs, it was at Dundee United. That type of player and that sort of mould. Again, not to be too needy, but I would probably want a better footballer than Fuchs. In all honesty, I think he's a break up and destroy kind of guy rather than much of a footballer. But I think that's the kind of players that we need to be looking at, if I'm honest. Athleticism is just so important. The comment that we heard secondhand from a Motherwell player yesterday, that we would run all over the top of Hibs. We knew we'd run all over the top of Hibs when you seen that team yesterday. I don't think you've got that if you've got a bastard in midfield who's willing to put the yards in and ultimately snap into a few challenges.
Well, Grant Fraser, a man of my own heart, a man I was thinking of as well, said Mark Milligan. I was a huge Mark Milligan enthusiast. The thing is, I think we probably got him slightly past his twilight years. So maybe if we got him a bit earlier in his career, he definitely could have filled that in, because the boy could play ball.
He was good. He was good. I wish we'd signed him when he was 29 and not 33.
Yeah,
I think as well. He could also play centre half as well. He was very good. I just think he was all round. He was really, really quality, but you could see the quality slightly diminishing as he went on through that season, unfortunately. But a really, really good player.
And just to stoke the fire as such, I would say out of the attributes you listed there, I would say the player best suited to that at the club, having seen him do it a few times when we needed to, I'd say it's probably Lewis Stevenson. I know it sounds daft because we've not really got left back options at the moment, but to have a person that can consistently pass a ball more than 10 yards and consistently break up play in the middle. I think that stint that he had when Maloney came in, where he was consistently playing in the centre of the pitch, I think he actually looked all right there, but that was in a very bad Hibs team, so maybe he wouldn't keep up with the pace that we're trying to play with at the moment. But yeah, if Lewis Stevenson's going to play with
pace,
if we were managing the team, Greg, we would.
That's what we're trying to inspire Lee Johnson to do. Stevenson's probably not fitting that mold. But yeah, you look like you've got a thing to say.
A couple of things popped in my head. I thought Bacchus was a standout for St Mirren last week, playing as a six. I think he popped up in other areas of the park, because I don't think a six needs to be isolated to sitting in front of the back four. But I'm interested. So if we were talking formations and stuff, from what I've said, from what Ryan said, I think if we were to pick a formation based on everything we say tonight, we'd probably land on a 4-2-3-1. Does the need, if you're playing a 2 there, does that need for that style of player change? Do you still need that player there? Like, what, you know what I mean?
I think it's horses for courses. Like, I don't think necessarily that player needs to play 90 minutes in every single league game that we play this season. But I suggest they probably need to think about a fixture list, probably in at least half, if not more, of the games that we play this season. Because I do think we need someone who's in there to break up the play, and I do think we've got lots of players who've got some of the ingredients that we need, but we don't have all the ingredients in one player, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
You look at Josh Campbell's hard run and his athleticism, we'd probably get him in that part of it, but Josh Campbell does not have the actual sort of the instincts, the defensive instincts to play that role. He also, if I'm being honest, is a bit weak in the tackle. Like, he seems to get brushed off stuff quite a lot, so no use in that mould. And there's others as well where they bring some of those ingredients, but they just don't have it in its totality. And that's where I kind of struggle. Is like, are we just going to go through the entire season just bringing players in to play the six, depending on who we're playing against, rather than having one designated six who can play those games when we need them?
We need continuity throughout the team, and you're absolutely, and probably your point here definitely feeds into what Ryan's saying, because whether it's a 3 at the back or a 4 at the back, if you're no used to what's in front of you as much as to what's beside you, or if you're like you're playing in a 3 at the back, but then you've got a different midfield in front of you as well. It's been a bit of a mess. Like, we must have. I think every team changes formations, but we've probably operated on 4 or 5 different styles in sort of 3 or 4 competitive games already this season. There's no continuity in the team so far at all, Harry.
I think one thing with the six, when Diego came on against St Mirren, I think that it enabled the likes of the other midfielders to actually push forward. And I think that's because we were chasing the game, we were on the front foot, whereas when we were away to Motherwell, and he was playing, Diego wouldn't drop in to pick up the ball, so you would always have Newell or Levitt actually dropping back. So it was essentially playing 3 6s when you were in possession, and then playing like Diego does his job in terms of like breaking up the play and stuff, or sits back and tries to do his job. But when we're in possession, I feel that when he starts games in which it's kind of a level playing field in terms of who's attacking, who's defending, I feel that Diego, you need to have a player, as Liam says, that can take the ball and move the team forward, because otherwise you're just going to be disjointed moving up and down the field, in my opinion. It's
difficult to, like, we're not bashing Diego here. We're just saying we think we need better in that role, ultimately. I hope that's not what's taken away from this, because I think we've been equally as critical of multiple individuals in there. And, like, for all we said about Diego, I think it would be amiss not to say he did play a part in Joe Newell and Jake Doyle-Hayes finishing the season strongly last season. For as far as I'm concerned, it's just because the manager put someone there. But he did play. He was that person, and Joe Newell went on to win Player of the Year because of the way he finished the season, being 10 yards further up the pitch. You know what I mean?
There is a role for Diego, but it's not starting games of football. It really isn't. It's coming on last 10, maybe an extra body in there, heading it and kicking it. Not to start games, so I don't think he brings enough to the team. It's an absolute myth that your six should just be anti-football and should just smash folk about the place. Like, no, the six has to contribute as well if you play with one. And he needs to contribute by driving forward into pockets of space, picking out passes. And unfortunately, Jimmy Diego can't do that. And look, we're not sitting here pretending we are world-class football players. We're also limited football players, but what you want to see from your six is the qualities of pulling the team up the pitch, picking out space, playing passes in areas that we can attack from, and he just doesn't do it. He's not got the quality of pass to do that.
But we talk about wanting, we talk about no wanting to go direct. Six has got to be capable of taking the ball off the defenders.
Yeah, exactly.
Almost to avoid you doing that. He, in theory, should see the ball more than anyone else on the pitch if he's in the team. And
I'm not saying take it off the centre half and lash it 70 yards up the pitch, but your midfielders will be dropping into space as well. Find them into feet. But he's just unfortunately not got the capabilities for that.
Sorry, guys. Ryan's had his hand up. His finger's been wagging that much. I'm scared it's going to fall off. Ryan, what would you like to chime in with?
No. So I also think it's important that your number 6 almost orchestrates the press. I think we need to be applying a lot more pressure to the ball at times. That's why opposition are getting the opportunity to slice us apart with these passes. And there's no applied pressure on the ball. You've got so much time and space. It's not acceptable in this league. So I think having your number 6 in there communicating who's to press, where to press, I think that's a big part, like really communicating in there.
Effective 6 also basically does doggies and cuts off passing lanes.
Yeah, absolutely.
That either because the ball comes right through us.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. Just Ewan made an interesting point about Newell obviously playing further forward and stuff. And I thought you made a good point about that it wasn't necessarily because of Jago, it was because of the body, which is a very valid point. And you said that, Harry, I think you said when he came on against St Mirren, it enabled the 2 midfielders to play further forward. I don't know if that's an individual trait or an individual quality that Jago brings, or if it's just the presence of a player deeper in the pitch. But I do think that we need to have increased quality in that position. So vital in modern day football that you have somebody there that can do everything and do everything well. I'm not saying they need to be world class, but they need to be adept at all things in that position, as Ewan's kind of highlighted there. Liam, sorry.
Big part of the reason Aberdeen had success for a period under Derek McInnes was because of Graham Shinnie. I think we would all probably admit that he's not a complete footballer in terms of what he brings. Watched enough of Graham Shinnie, probably more of Graham Shinnie than I would really care to admit over the last sort of 10, 15 years in Scotland. And I think he's a perfectly decent footballer. He's done well for Aberdeen, but he's someone who enjoys a booking, can break the play up, can take the ball off the centre halves, and ultimately he's got a decent left foot on him. That's the kind of mould of guy that we've probably not really had, if I'm being honest, for quite a long period of time. There's different ways to do it. I think there's different players that you can get in to come and fulfil that role. So I don't think it's like we're shopping in a closed shop or anything like that, but we do need to address it soon, because it's a pivotal position for every football club.
I think what Graham Shinnie also brings is he is a bit of a bastard, doesn't he?
Mm-hmm.
Do you know what I mean? Which we absolutely need. We're really soft. Seen that yesterday. Really, really soft. We're kind of chasing the game. We're getting pushed all about the park. We need a bastard there.
He's a leader as well, and there shouldn't just be one leader on the pitch. You should have numerous, and he is a leader. And look, he'll fly into tackles that others don't want to. He'll do the dirty side of it, and he'll knock the ball 5-10 yards either side. But he gives it to the better, more technical players to go make the difference. And that's what we're really lacking at the moment.
The 3 best teams in the league last year, if you look at the default, just at the league table, all have effective players in that position that are all entirely different. Cal McGregor, Ryan Jack, and Graham Shinnie. I would say they all do fairly different roles for their team. They're similar players, but perhaps in each kind of section that we've explained, and it just it shows the importance of it, but there's more than one way to skin a cat. One thing I would say as well is we are perhaps letting some other players off. If you were to go right back to Saturday, Joe Newell was outstanding on Thursday and real bad on Sunday. So there is still accountability that needs to be taken elsewhere in that midfield as well. But I do think a 6 would massively increase the consistency.
I think the game plan that we kind of deployed on Sunday really didn't help our midfield get into the game. We were going back to front quite a lot.
Just feel that take some control over it right away. Like we've seen.
Absolutely. You kind of go in there and demand the ball and kind of take away that element of the centre halves wanting to go long, because you give them no option. Just give me the ball, sort of thing. So I do agree with you in that sense. This isn't any fault of Doidge's, but whenever he's on the pitch, it almost becomes too easy to play that long ball, which is a shame because he is effective in the team, but you don't want him being the reason that we're going long all the time, because it isn't effective enough for us to play. We don't have runners off him.
Yeah. And as Ryan touched on that, I'm getting our segues in when I can. You want certain players on the field. I think a lot of the criticism of Lee Johnson of late has been a better manager would get more out of the squad. I think in terms of the transfer window, if you look at that in isolation, I think we've all been pretty happy with the players we've brought in, the positions that we've recruited in. And Greg, you're going to talk us through why personnel is something that Lee Johnson should be making a better use of.
Yeah, so I mean, if you look at Thursday, I thought we were very good, but unfortunately, Johnson doesn't get the best out of us as frequent as he should. Why aren't we getting results? We're not getting results because ultimately our manager has the shackles on us, and that's what it feels like at times. It feels like we're set up to play slow, almost possession, slow build up, sort of knock the ball about, look pretty, but we don't knock the ball about with any real purpose. We don't knock it about with a view to moving the opposition or pulling them out. The players aren't being utilised correctly. In my opinion, we don't need a 6. We need 2 8s, and that's where the 4-2-3-1 comes in. If you have Newland and Doyle Hayes there, we'll leave it in front. I think we're more than capable of winning games of football like that. Newell likes to drive with the ball. We've seen that. Drive from deep, pull us up. You've got Doyle Hayes in there who's so neat and tidy, can pick out a pass, can play balls in behind. They two complement each other really well. And I know that some Hibs fans won't agree with that, but I genuinely believe that they two are perfect together. And with Levitt in behind the striker, you get that little bit of creativity. Now, for me, if Levitt is in the 10, he should be pretty much doggies for side to side, picking up pockets of space, looking for angles, trying to get the ball in behind the opposition. So I think we've got a good base to work from. I think that the squad is good. Obviously, there's a few that probably can be questioned on that, but for me, the squad's good enough to go and challenge. But the way we're set up and the style of playing, the tactical side of things isn't anywhere near where it should be. We're so defensive at times. We're so negative, really. If you look at yesterday, we almost look scared to come up the pitch and try and create chances. Now, that is either a confidence thing, which I don't believe, because Thursday was a huge confidence booster for us, and it's the way the manager sets up to play. And for me, it's the latter. He just, when he first came, he said all these lovely things about pressing and attractive football. You don't see it often enough for him to come out and say that. So for me, we need a pressing game, set ourselves up properly, and get Newland Doyle Hayes in the 8, Levitt in the 10, Boyle and Jan either side of Venti. And you can either change it, and then stick Doidge in the 10 and almost make him a focal point if we need to go that a little bit more direct and knock the ball down for the midfielders or the wide players or look to get him behind.
Do you think the 2 players you've mentioned there in the 10 have the energy to play that pressing game that you're discussing? Because the one thing I feel with Levitt now is that he just looks a bit slow, but just, it's not, he doesn't look like that athlete like a Johnny.
To be fair, I noticed a couple of times on Thursday intercepted passes and he got back, so I think he's got the energy. I think his instructions being relayed to him, and look, you can also coach him in that role as well. He's a young lad, he's not set in his ways, so I definitely believe he does have the energy. I just think it is the way he's being coached, to be honest, and I think that's probably why we've seen good players maybe fail at this club recently, is because the way they're being coached. I feel like Lee Johnson maybe over coaches and forces players to play his way, which I understand to an extent, but you can't overcoach players and take their raw abilities out of them.
And with that midfield shape, would that for you would that negate a need to sign a 6 like what Liam's said, or would you be happy to go that as a free?
Absolutely, because you've got the two that like taking the ball centre half. You can't sit too deep with it though. You would need one further advanced if one was going to take in the ball, but I feel like they two really are excellent midfield players that can carry it. But what we need is we need that out ball as well. Because I feel like sometimes we're sort of passing the ball with no real impetus or end goal there. We almost don't trust players, so you almost need to build that into the squad as well.
Just before we, I've got a couple of questions, but the YouTube comment section has been quite fun. An interesting comment, I think, is very valid. Stephen Forbes said, "Been saying it for months. We lack power in that midfield. We need a 6 who can put his foot on the ball, and as you said, needs to be a horrible bastard." I think that power is actually quite an interesting word there. I think when I read that, I was like, that's actually very valid. So thank you, Stephen, for that.
Morton.
Pardon?
He's just saying for Morton.
Hey, oh, I didn't want that power. And then
Max power.
there's a Jambo that is slagging us off. Fair play to you. Thank you for listening anyway. And then
What
Yeah.
a diddy,
Can we just-
listening to a
can-
Hibs podcast.
Can we just, there's one thing that Hearts fans love above all else, and that has been a subject matter expert on all things Hibernian FC.
yeah.
Right, unreal, man. You've got to respect the commitment.
We've got to big up our boy because
hell.
what do you call it? David, our Hearts resident today, has said that Benny and Devlin, as in Benny Beningame, should be our replacement 6. And then Craig McCurdy said Benny with the Weetabix ankles has barely played one game in the last year. Weetabix ankles a corker, by the way. That is superb.
Did Bellingham not get 2 assists for Rosenborg though?
Craig, I know the first thing back and they got hooked at half time. I've seen Hearts fans saying that they should be starting I think like a 17 or an 18-year-old in central midfield because Devlin and Beningame have been shocking. I think he came on yesterday.
But back to him.
If they're Weetabix ankles, they're definitely Weetabix after the milk's been poured in it. To be honest.
Liam the
Big soggies. That's enough Jambo chat anyway.
Oh god! Back to him, Greg. One thing with Lee Johnson that so obviously Josh Campbell's won a point to before Johnson came. Campbell was pretty poor. I think it's fair to say a lot of the Hibs fans would have loaned out, and then under Campbell, especially the first half of last season, he looked really good. And then another player, Ewan Henderson, during the League Cup group stage, I know it was against lower league opposition, but again, Henderson, a lot of us had him as likely to be one of our players of the year, faded away. What is it that Johnson manages to bring out of players that aren't very good, and why can't he prolong that? Is it a confidence thing, do you think? Because we've seen him in the press a few times throw players under the bus. Do you think that there's maybe conversations behind closed doors that he could maybe handle better? Is there anything you think we could point to that? I know we're speaking almost in hypotheticals here.
There's plenty of conversations he could have better had. In terms of Josh Campbell, I do think he's brought him on. I think he's also another player that probably suits the 10, more drifting off the striker. We've seen it a couple of times that he is good at that. Deeper though, he's not good enough. He's not good enough to play in the 8. He's not strong enough. He doesn't have the ability. But in the 10, absolutely. I would probably say the same for Ewan Henderson, but his confidence is absolutely shot to pieces by now. He's not playing. He's not getting a sniff. So yeah, you can't just start chucking players in there. I actually say the same to Brodie at the first European home game, where you will need to rely on your full squad this season the deeper you go into Europe. And there may be times where players come in and they don't hit the ground running because they've not got that match experience in a run of games. And I think Josh Campbell and Ewan Henderson at the moment aren't playing, and they will suffer from that. But I think Josh Campbell has the ability to come in, but I don't think Ewan Henderson does at this point because he's just not played enough.
Has anybody else got any personnel related questions? One thing from Jason Laddie said that Adam Le Fondre could cover as a 10. Would you guys feel comfortable seeing Adam Le Fondre drop into that role?
I think in some games we were expected to dominate the ball. I think he's got the intelligence to link up and make those runs off it. I think where he might find it a bit more difficult is off the ball, but not really seen enough of him really to assess. I know he's played a few games, but I'm not really seen enough of him to assess what sort of condition he's in. He's also come from a league where maybe, one of the things that's lacking is kind of high intensity, shall we say.
I think the signs were there of a partnership with Vente against Luzern, just even with a goal. I think Fondre is a smart enough player that I think he'll do things like that all season. So, and I know I think Liam's right in saying we've not seen much of him, but for the strikers, they had to put a hell of a shift in that game, and they both got 70 minutes, I think, out of them, with both of them finishing their spell with real quality. So I think whether it's a 10, whether it's a striker, whether he's playing just off Vente or up way, I think that the forwards, I'm fine with, probably. I'm pretty comfortable with the options we have going forward right now. It's just piecing it all together.
I think we've got different forwards as well. We're not too one-dimensional up there.
Yeah, I just want to add to the Adam Le Fondre thing. I underestimated how good his movement is, how sharp he is, and how clever he is. I didn't know much about him before. I knew he was a goal scorer, but I'm quite glad we've got him on board. I don't think his age is relevant to the type of footballer he is. He's shown us, even in short snippets, that he's fairly sharp and a very clever football player. So I think going forward, he could be quite a good option for us.
I said to you before the game, then when Wayne Rooney was sort of dropped back a bit towards the end of his Man United career, maybe that's where Adam Lafondra could play.
That's your 6.
Sorry, I'd just like to pop in here. I've just seen the YouTube comments there as well. Simon Payton, who I think might be a Hearts fan, has said, "Give the early 2000s their jokes back." So Liam and Greg, I think you have just got a huge compliment there, saying that you look young enough to be born in the early 2000s, given your...
Said Agent Johnson, he was replying to someone else on the YouTube. You made a bit of cunt of that, haven't you?
A shop front.
Oh,
Made an absolute shot front of himself.
Oh, guys, stop talking about making a shot front of themselves. We got another segue, guys. My topic of conversation is the way that Lee Johnson presents himself in front of media. I think that having personality is a huge thing in football. I think especially when you're in leadership roles, I think that your captains and even the likes of Jason Cummings when he was at the club has a personality in which the fans find contagious, and you can tell that he's going to be quite bubbly in and around the dressing room. I think we've got that quite strongly in the likes of a Martin Boyle figure. And then we've obviously got some reserve players who are not quite personality centric, like your Paul Hanlon, Lewis Stevenson, who I still think play a strong leadership role within the club. But Lee Johnson, it's fair to say, is a very outspoken man when it comes to his time in the press. He's had some, in my opinion, absolute clangers I said it literally the moment he said it, I think it was his first defeat at the club when a St Mirren fan shouted, "Your team's shite, mate," and he goes back to him, "You're not wrong. If you're going to come into the club and Hibs are going to dominate and you're going to make us the third best team in the country, you get away with those sorts of comments. If fans are kind of, I'm not too sure about this guy," and you start making comments like, "Oh, we got beat 6-1 at Celtic Park. Why aren't the Hibs players asking Celtic players what they had for their breakfast?" When we get beat on the first league game of the season and you say to a player, "How would you play if a lion were running behind you?" All these things, they're funny in isolation, and when we look back in a few months' time, it's going to be funny. But for me, we're a serious football club who've invested well in a squad that should be viably competing for third every season with Hearts and Aberdeen. That's a position that Hibs should be in. And Lee Johnson, at the moment for me, hasn't shown that he's the manager to take us to do that. And the way he conducts himself in media interviews just makes me think that he's going to be one of these types of people that does motivational nonsense that doesn't actually get anybody motivated in the changing room. So for me, I think that the main thing that Lee Johnson needs to do from now on is before he says things, he should think, and he should do a bit of a SWOT analysis. The strengths of me saying it, I don't look like a fanny. The weaknesses of me saying it, I'll look like a fanny, I'll not say that. The opportunity is to look like a leader for this team that fans can get behind and back, that the players can then see the way he conducts himself and get behind and back. And the threats, if I keep looking like a fanny, the fans are going to continue not liking me and they're going to want to get rid. So guys, Lee Johnson, he just needs to kind of buck up the ideas when it comes to media time. Is that a fair comment?
He's almost like this newfound coach that just starts chucking buzzwords and the little analogies. My favourite one personally is about the Sharks, and Sharks don't bother about Monday because they just go about biting stuff and being aggressive. Like, where does he think of this stuff? Genuinely, that's my first worry, is where's he getting it from? My second point is that the manager should really want to relate to the fans and just speak like a normal guy, right? And what he does is he chucks stuff in there and he loses credibility for it. And whether he's trying to protect his ego or whatever, I'm not asked. The manager of a football club, talk normal and just talk like a normal person would. Because he hits it with this stuff after games and says he's psychotic about GPS. Well, I'm psychotic about the stats. The stats for yesterday is his grace. But he wants to go on about lions chasing folk and have your supper if you're not hungry or whatever. Like, he just talks utter guff. And it's boring. And it opens us up for an absolute pile of abuse because he can't talk like a normal person relating to normal people watching football.
And just quickly before we get anybody else chiming in, we'll go back to the YouTube comment section. So if you guys want to get involved and hear what we're talking, like answering your questions live, then please do join us. We go live ideally on Mondays at 7, but you never know. These days it seems like 10 past. Anyway, Lee McLennan said, with Melkerson leaving, Harry, are you loaning your song to the Norwegians? Well, based on the deal I'm hearing, probably going to sell it to them, mate. We can get that as part of the deal. And then he also said, Sunderland and City fans all jumped on comments last night saying exactly the same thing about Johnson. He throws his players under the bus, apparently Bristol City, particularly the young lads. I do think that's something that has crept up quite a few times. Also, a comment I'm not particularly happy with. Dave Graham said, Christ, Specky actually sounds like Lee Johnson now. I need specifics on when I sounded like him. Jesus. Jeez. But yeah, the throwing players under the bus, it's something that Neil Lennon, when he did it, properly divided the fan base. Half the fans were like, they weren't good enough to deserve to be thrown under the bus. The other half of the fan base were like, what's he doing? He's just going to demoralise the squad and turn people against them. And I think eventually, I do think that was kind of his downfall. Is that something that irks you when a manager calls out their players? Or do you think if it's warranted, then it's fair enough?
Neil Lennon was right.
Sorry.
Neil Lennon was right about Canberra. If they need called out, they need called out. They're not immune to criticism because the fans will probably see that as well. So they're not immune. I don't believe caning one player for the third goal against St Mirren is correct though, because it was a collective. So if you're gonna pull it out, let's be consistent with it and not just start caning individuals when it's a group effort from 3 or 4 that weren't good enough. And ultimately, there's a lot of time he's not good enough, but he will never admit that. He's too busy talking about sharks and lions and the animal kingdom. So.
Yep, I agree with Greg there. I don't think in certain, well, you got to look at the context of things. I don't think in certain circumstances where he has sold players down the river that he should. I think the one with Fish, he's kind of chucked him under the bridge there based off GPS and stats and things like that. Use your eyes, it's the 89th minute of the game. Fatigue, other players could have done better, whatever. But like Greg says, to come out and just completely chuck one player under the bus in that context wasn't fair, in my opinion. Life's not fair, but you've got to protect your players sometimes when you've got it wrong.
I'm going to disagree here. I'm going to give a little bit of context, right?
This is what we want. We want an argument.
Context is
because if Ewan disagrees, you're on the right side.
No, I think the boys are right in the sense of saying it shouldn't have been one player and stuff, Harry. And I think Greg's actually spot on. See, if he spoke about me normally, a lot of the stuff that he says would come across better. I disagree entirely, especially sorry, Ryan, with what Ryan said there. Well, Fish to be called out for that third goal. The stats and the shit they put in the wee bra thing that's on the back tells you if he's working at 100%. In the 89th minute, he should be fucking bursting a gut to get back there. If Lee Johnson comes out after the game and says, I've looked at the stats and some of the players are only running at 80% to get back, that's not good enough. That comes across as, we're all going, he's got a little bit of something about him here. That's better. But then he starts hitting out with fucking about the shark, with the fucking lion, and how he found that comment a bit funny. Mate, see if you just fucking hit full stop and left it, that's no good enough. In the 89th minute of the game, they should all be bursting their gut back, whether he wants to name Will Fish in that situation or no. You know what I mean? When he says at Celtic Park,
sorry, just to butt in there, you're right enough, Ewan. Like say that, maybe not necessarily always name the player. You've got to be careful of the personality. Maybe Will Fish is a young lad. You've got to be wary of that. You're right. You should be coming out and saying somebody was running at 83% wasn't good enough. Sometimes name the player, sometimes don't. I agree with you. Sorry for butting in.
When he talked about it not being good enough at St Mirren, you're no wrong. Again, there's ways to say that thing, and you're right, Harry. If you go and win 3 games after that, then it's sound. But even the Celtic Park thing, there's ways to say that they should be aspiring to be as good as him. Because Celtic at that point in time, and probably still are head and shoulders above everyone in the league, and especially where we were at the time. But there's just ways to say things. And I think Lee Johnson, see when he came in, he spoke about the history of the club and all that, and how he really wanted to embed himself in it, and how he was really privileged to be here at such a big club. And I have not really taken him, but I do think he appreciates his job at Hibs. I think he knows what he's got. But sometimes he just needs to, what I think's been said by all you guys, slow down and just be a bit more aggressive. And if that's no necessarily his style, maybe he's learned his management techniques and stuff. Maybe that's just not his personality, and you can't force that upon someone. But in theory, I think sometimes a lot of what he's saying is all right. Like if you were to almost just try and actually process what he's saying as opposed to what he's actually, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to explain it, but like that's
So you think it's
is the perfect fucking example where he could have just said, it's not fucking good enough not to be running at 100% to get back in the 89th minute, but he decided to add on all the other shit.
Yeah.
So one thing I would say about Lee Johnson, I don't know if you guys will agree or not. I think I said it once, and Greg gave me a bit back. Whenever we've actually spoken to him, I think Lee Johnson speaks very well. I think that I can understand why the board, the likes of Ben Kensel and the people in the upper senior management team of the club, take to him quite well, because I think he speaks very well. I think that when he actually put a question to him and he talks through it and explains himself, I think he conducts himself very well. And I don't know if he wants to have some form of persona in the media, but for me, it just doesn't transpire. Because see the couple of, before we had him on the podcast, just after New Year, I thought, I was like, you know what, I could probably get on board with this guy. I was like, fair enough. And then it just transpired that, again, it was all talk. And I don't know if that's something that annoys me as well. He says some really good quotes and doesn't back them up. Like, the thing that always sticks out in my head was when he first joined and he was like, you're never going to see us sit back. You're always going to see us attack. It doesn't matter if we get beat 6-0, we're going to have 6 shots on target anyway. And I think he talks a good game. I just don't think at times he backs up. And I think in media especially, he sometimes just makes a fool of himself. Do you guys think Lee Johnson talks well or no?
A lot of it's accountability. Let's go back to when he first came in. He moaned about the structure of the competition instead of saying, actually, I didn't adapt. That's all. I didn't adapt well enough. Apologies, we move on. Fair enough. Against Celtic, I want to see what they eat for their breakfast. The club have got someone in position that do nutrition, so not required. But I get the sentiment. But it's that added on bit at the end. And the worst one was yesterday when the day was poor, but as hungry meant we must look for our supper. Like, that just means nothing in terms of football. That means nothing. And imagine that man trying to sit and get you up for a game and he's coming out with all these analogies. Like, you wouldn't take him seriously because you'd be like, what is he chatting about? But it's the added on stuff every time. He makes good points and then ruins it by adding nonsense on at the end. And in an informal setting, sorry, Harry, in an informal setting with us, he came across very well because there was no bullshit. He didn't try and add stuff on and stories or whatever. It was straight up. I asked him a question about how he rated the window. He said, I'll give you another rating, 8 out of 10 for such and such. That is good stuff because you're not ripping the arse out the point. But he does it every time. I don't know where he gets it. Like, Jayla, I've actually watched The Office back again. And he just screams David Brent. Like, it's a bit flippant at first, but Jayla, now you can absolutely see it. Like, they're like twins.
And Ewan, we'll get your opinion, but close to that, Lee McLennan said, the fact Lee Johnson now has a Twitter page dedicated to his quotes tells you how much shite he has spoken for years. If you type in Johnsonisms into Twitter, you will find, I didn't actually believe the shark one was real, and then it came up actually being real, and they have a clip of it, and that was mental to me. Then Craig McCurdy got 2 comments and said, Lee Johnson's not likeable and not inspiring in my opinion, wouldn't get the extra bit out of you needed to win tight games. He talks like he's trying to impress people with big words and jargon, but that's not relatable to the fans and more than likely the players. And then Max Allen said, Ewan's favourite comment we've ever had. Ewan makes some great points when he doesn't mention formations.
Hey, I'm done with formations. That's one thing that was learned tonight. Just fucking put the players on the park and see what happens.
If you're looking for that Twitter page, it's at Brent or Johnson. Just another one here. I can't be too displeased with the performance. On the data, percentile wise, it was a win, although it wasn't. Really, really bad.
I think that's been
Lee Johnson, 2022.
I was going to say, I think that was with us. That was a game we drew.
Unbelievable.
Why is he so data driven and things like why is he so upfront about it? Like,
Well,
I'm sure a lot of
he
managers are
actually-
data driven, but just do it behind closed doors, man, because you
He
open
made
yourself
a-
up to this.
He made a comment about Kyle McGuinness against Shane Johnson at home when he got sent off. He said that the data and the GPS was looking okay, that we had no issues with him. But if he actually opened his eyes and didn't just look at his iPad and bury his head in that, he would have seen that Kyle McGuinness was snapping at people already. So you
Correct.
take him off. Like, coaching isn't done through an iPad. People don't watch games of football looking at all these different GPS things. They look at it with their eyes. And sometimes I feel like football's become too convoluted with all this technology. Your eyes ultimately will not lie to you. So please just watch the game with your eyes.
I don't want us to get too keys and grey here. Like, there is definitely a balance. Like, I do. Like, I think your eyes most definitely can lie to you. I mean, we slagged people off on the podcast in the past, at each other off, and for varying opinions and stuff. And so you do. I think there is relevant things, but I mean, Greg is a perfect example. Everyone on the ground could see that McGuinness was one mere tackle away that night. But yeah, it's like the good example of Johnson actually now and again saying good things and getting ridicule. See that clip when he's at Aston Villa away? All he does is talk sense. I think he just says, "Oh yeah, things."
No,
Yeah.
Don't listen to me. No, but he says that there's things we can learn, like putting the away fans up in the corner. I'm sorry.
That's all that needs to be said. But
Isn't that what
again,
he
he
said?
harps on.
no. He
He
said that it's
harps
like
on about it. He said us as
two
a
home
club
ends.
is all this, and he goes on about the structure and you got two home ends, and we can learn for this. But see if he said but see if he came out and said we could actually move the away fans over there and have two home ends at the end of each goal.
But that's basically.
Perfect.
See, but that's.
I'm sure it's like a 2-3 minute clip.
Mate, it's like 27 seconds. He just says there's a lot we can learn. They've got two home ends behind each goal, and our fans are up in the corner.
Do you know what I found weird about it?
What we would do if we could. Like, we done it once against Rangers, I think. They only had the upper top corner. And maybe in the playoff game once. Like this is the thing, like, but still, like, just the way he carries himself, that comes across as stupid. But it's not stupid. But it all feeds back, Harry. He talks a talk about fast attacking football. I think the clip, the snippet of his presentation interview on Hibs has been doing the rounds on Twitter, and he says his team play on the front foot and stuff. And ultimately, in periods of his tenure, we have seen it. Fuck's sake, he said judges after 12 games. Well, after 11, we were doing no too bad. And then from then, it pretty much went downhill. I would still say the best period of Lee Johnson's tenure was probably the first 6 to 8 league games last season, which is worrying, like, considering it was so early, and that might, this is not me saying he's lost the dressing room or anything, but that would suggest to me that he got buy-in initially, and then something's changed.
Well, I'll tell you something. He's lost all credibility for me when he comes out and blames fatigue, and then his club captain gets up 5 minutes later and says it's not fatigue. So he's lost all credibility now. He just sounds stupid. He goes, now we put too much into Thursday. He can affect that. He can literally affect that by making substitutions. So he's not done that, and then that's his go-to complaint for yesterday. It doesn't wash with me. Like, as a football manager who has managed over 500 games or whatever,
as he likes to tell us constantly,
as he likes to tell the full world, he acts like a manager in his first season.
Europe shouldn't be too much an adjustment for him either, because he's managing England where they play midweek. Like,
they play like 45 league games or something, in League 1 and League 2. Sorry?
46 or something, yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So
your weekend, midweek, a lot of the time, but his first go-to is fatigue. I'm not being funny. Second league game, and he's already going about fatigue.
First league game. Like,
clearly, he's not got the ability or the minerals to adjust his training schedule if he thinks that players are fatigued. He doesn't. So he's going to bring that argument every week we're in Europe, by the way. Every week we're in Europe and don't get a positive result. And by the way, We need out of Europe ASAP because clearly we can't handle 2 games in the 1 week.
He highlighted 6 players were injured, but he still could have made more changes. He said he made a mistake against St Mirren naming the same 11 to then only change 3 players, regardless of. For me, if he feels the fatigue was the main issue, not that I think they're the best, but start Henderson, start Melkerson, start Megwa, start Harbottle. Like I said it to Greg coming out. I said it earlier. I said it to Greg coming out the game. I didn't want to see Vente's name on the team sheet. I didn't want to see Newell's name on the team sheet. And I get it. There was some injuries. I think Ewan Campbell and Doyle Hayes were the obvious ones that missed out, along with some longer term ones. But there were still other players in the squad. You know, like
they also sorry, you carry on. I thought you were finished. We also pick up a ridiculous amount of injuries for a club with excellent training facilities. A ridiculous amount of injuries. So I don't know what we do in training, but there's a lot of injuries there.
Can't believe even come on.
No.
We haven't been communicated to by the club in terms of fan base as to why these players are missing as well. But still leaves you kind of scratching your head. I know there's some rumour just now regarding you, and if the club came out and said the reason why he missed it, like if he was injured, because I'm sure the rumours are bull, he's only just joined, it would kind of put that to bed a little bit, you know. I said this in the group chat and I'll say it again. I kind of got ripped because you and made an arse it, but we have everything in place to be a top club. We have the training facilities. We have the budget. We have recruited well. We have a very well experienced man and director of football. You know, we need a manager to refine those minerals and bring them together.
Well, what's the difference between a raw mineral and a cooked mineral?
You tell me. It's your turn.
All right. Well,
so just on that, we have a manager, as I said in my piece, that puts the shackles on us and doesn't let us freely express ourselves on the football pitch and off it. I don't think he comes across that great in the club as well with certain individuals. Ultimately, there is one factor here that everything comes back to. So if that is the case, then he needs to go. And that's all I'll say on it.
Well, just on the fatigue, because we've went on about it for a while, Craig said they're professional athletes who are a handful of competitive games into a season. Fatigue is not an excuse now, that's their job. David Youngs, the Jambo, said, fatigue, think back to when I was a young lad and the amount of football I played. Players should not be fatigued at this stage of the season. Dan Taylor, very good point, said just on fatigue there, he managed midweek and weekend fixtures in the Championship. What's different? St Mirren have played more competitive games than us this season. We had plenty of time to plan for this. Jason Ladd just randomly threw in. We also have Jimmy Jeggle. And then Craig said, why continue to play Hamlin and Stevens 3 days apart when they would surely need rest after Thursday? Yeah. Well, guys,
that's a point I can get on board with. I just want to say that the whole thing about this episode and Lee Johnson isn't knee-jerk. A lot of us feel that he's been very lucky to stay in the job this long. I just want to kind of affirm the point that this isn't off the back of losing 2 league games. This has been a thing for a long time that Lee Johnson's been underperforming in his role.
I also don't think we're asking for him to be sacked, to be honest.
No. I mean, in general, the comments coming in and stuff like that, like a lot of people are unhappy. I kind of meant as a fan base as opposed to a podcast. I think a lot of us kind of feel that he is lucky to have still been in the job at the start of the season. So it isn't based purely off losing 2 league games, the first 2 at that.
Then you have a horrendous start because you get beaten Andorra.
Yes, yeah.
Doesn't help himself. Again,
no.
So
I mean, look at the start of his tenure, League Cup.
Take us on. I can't do this anymore.
And even then, he blamed the format of the competition and not himself.
Just win the games. Anyway, sorry, Harry.
That's okay. So, in conclusion, we're asking Lee Johnson to play high and wide football. We're asking Lee Johnson to get a defensive structure that doesn't put players in positions to make mistakes regularly. We're asking Lee Johnson to sign a number 6 or create a midfield that's balanced and can actually work week in, week out, regardless of what personnel's in there. Speaking of which, we're asking him to utilise his personnel to the best of their abilities, such as playing them in their correct positions and playing our best players in positions that suit them best and will help the rest of the team. And finally, we're asking him to build a bit of a media presence that doesn't get us, him, and the club laughed at on a regular basis. We don't think that that's a particularly difficult list to compute if that's your job. But yeah, no, thanks so much for everybody for listening. We always appreciate you tuning in. And just quickly before we go, Lee McLennan said we're asking LJ to resign. You choose your words, not us. But let's do quick predictions for Thursday. 2 goals ahead, heading over to Switzerland. I believe I'm the only one from the pod going over. I'm buzzing for that. Still not got my ticket, which is a bit of a worry. But we move. But guys, Luzern away, we're 3-1 ahead. Are we getting through? You and come to you first.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Yes. Ryan, do you think we'll get through?
I think we'll get beat 1-0 on the night, which is the first time I've predicted a loss. So that would take us through. I think we'll go through just the sheer grit and determination from certain individuals that'll drag us over the line.
And Greg, 1, do we win? Do we get through? And 2, does that help us get some momentum going into the games we've got ahead?
Do we get through? Yes, we do. And I can run you through the game if you like. I think we'll lose a goal after 2 minutes. We'll defend properly and like we should be, and then we'll hit them on the counter attack in the 90-odd minute to make it 1-1. And that will not give us momentum because we've seen after last week it doesn't really matter. I said to you, and I thought adrenaline would get us through yesterday's game. Clearly not. And I think we may see wholesale changes on the Sunday if we do get through.
I think, just for what's worth, Harry, the other boys will give you a score position. I think it'll be 2-1 to them. I think 2-1 them. How that comes around, I'm not entirely sure. And I would just touch on it and say, regardless of Thursday, we need categorically to win our next 2 games in domestic competition after that. Raith Rovers and Livingston, there is zero excuse for anything but progress in the cup and 3 points against Livingston. Going to Aberdeen out of the League Cup with less than 3 points on the board would be unacceptable, regardless of beating Luzern, regardless of what results are against Aston Villa. Because I know I said there's 36 more league games and stuff, but if you don't take points off Livy, then go to Aberdeen on the 4th game of the season, things can start to snowball.
So in isolation in that individual competition, it's needed. I agree with you.
The league is ultimately the priority. Sorry, Harry.
That's all right. I was just going to show the YouTube comments a last bit of love before we wrap up fully. Lewis Melrose said, is Lee Johnson too scared to rotate due to the drop-off in ability of the other options? Jason Ladd says, if he gets past Luzern, he's done an impressive feat. Craig says, no, we won't do that just now. David Young's final comment from our Jambo friend of the day said, Switzerland is a great country, by the way, just saying. Well, thank you. I don't think my bank account's going to agree with you after a couple of nights out there. But yeah.
There's been one last comment coming in that just said, fatigued against Raith.
That can be our title after we get beat 3-1 after beating Luzern 2-1 away. That'll be my prediction. I reckon they go 1-0 up, and I reckon we turn it around in the second half. But guys, thank you everybody that tuned in live for watching. Thank you guys for joining me, and we will catch you next time.